what podcasting lets you do is stand out in a way that demonstrates your personality and your authenticity, and that is a huge differentiator in any industry or whatever your brand you're trying to build.
You're listening to the Leading Liberty Podcast, where the rising stars of the freedom movement learn from the top minds in pro-liberty marketing, communication, and activism, what's working and not working right now, so you can do your cause the justice it deserves. And now, your host, Jen Gray.
Welcome to Leading Liberty with Jen Gray. My name is Jen Gray. All right, no, it's not. My name is Chris Spangle, and that is Greg Lenz. Greg, how are you?
I'm doing well, Chris. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm happy to be sitting in Jen's living room doing her podcast. She let us in through the door. We are the co-hosts of We Are Libertarians, a podcast that is very, very different than Jen's podcast, Greg.
Yes, we are more shock and awe, whereas she is more of an
adult.
An adult, yes.
Right.
Yes.
She's polite. She treats people with respect. She doesn't say offensive things.
Yes, she is a very, very well-spoken, articulate, clean Libertarian Party leader.
Now, see, this is the second draft of this first episode because we already were too offensive, so we had to cancel it out. And
she has excellent hygiene. That's all I was pointing out.
Her living room is amazingly clean, to be honest. So
no doubt.
She is. Jen has been a great friend to me and a great friend to our podcast, We're Libertarians. And let me tell you a little bit about our podcast and what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk about why you should start a podcast. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about who we are and who I am specifically. I became a libertarian. I'd always kind of been a libertarian, and then I became one officially in 2008. And I'd seen Ron Paul in the debates, as many of you, I would imagine, and he converted me to libertarianism from constitutional conservatism, essentially. I just wasn't sure about all that foreign policy stuff. I went on then to work at the Libertarian Party of Indiana for 4 years, and I was the executive director from 2008 to 2012, and in that time, we had a podcast that really helped drive a lot of our growth that we're going to talk about. Then I went on to work as the marketing director for the Advocates for Self-Government, and if you don't know who they are, I'm sure you've taken the world's smallest political quiz. They are the organization that prints and distributes that. And then went on from there to work for a nationally syndicated radio show where I still work, but at the LPIN, and to this day, I started a podcast called We Are Libertarians, and we've done it for 5.5 years. Greg joined in 2013, and we now have an average episode download of about 9,000, which puts us in the top 5% of all podcasts in the world, and we, make enough money to cover the costs. Through a Patreon, we have a thriving community, a big Facebook page, and we're eventually going to be able to turn this into a full-time business for all of us. And so the podcast has really been a great driver of it was a hobby that turned into something a little bit more, and we'll touch on that, I'm sure. But podcasting, I think that we have been able to build a big community because of the power of podcasting. I mean, how would you define the power of podcasting and your experience over these last 4 years?
As someone who is totally unfamiliar with it, and honestly, the first few years I was on the show, I didn't listen to any podcasts, including our own. and
it's just typical of those first few years.
Well, I mean, at the time, it was very, it wasn't quite as prevalent as it is now. Now it's much more, for instance, my parents are, my dad's a 70-year-old white suburban male, Methodist, goes, all the traditional baby boomer social institutions, and now that's something that even enters his lexicon.
Right.
That is a terminology he's familiar with, and if 2 years ago that wasn't the case, it's like a internet radio show? Like, no, not really.
Right.
It could be grouped as that, but what it really is whatever you want to turn, you can turn it into any format you want, obviously. It can, it's a lot of uses, but it really is an extension for you to build a personal brand or an institutional brand and demonstrate your thought leadership and get your ideas out there that lets like-minded individuals coalesce around it.
Yeah. It is more intimate than any other form of communication. I mean, so in the political world, we've got a lot of different tools that we can use, and in communication, you've got traditional advertising, you've got radio, you've got TV, you've got and then all of their sister products online like podcasting and YouTube, and there's social media and the written word and those platforms that kind of push some of that stuff out. And in our daily lives and consuming content, there's a lot of ways for us to access personalities or political thought. And I have found that podcasting and radio are much more intimate than any of the other platforms. And if you're an organization or a brand or a person who is trying to get started in whatever way, you're trying to get your name or your product out there, you've got a lot of different choices in where to put your time and energy. The quickest way to build community is through a podcast or a radio show. And I think the reason is that it's much more intimate. You are listening to us in headphones at work or in the car or as you're working around the house and mowing the lawn. And that lack of a barrier is really important. It's just directly into your brain. And then secondly, it's more passive. You're more willing to entertain new ideas because you are engaging with thoughts and ideas in a way where you aren't fumbling with the remote, or with TV's much more engaged viewing.
You're actively searching. You know what I mean?
Right. With podcasts, you're kind of passive, and your brain relaxes and can slip into a different mode of thinking, and more information passes into your head. And so I think that is an incredibly powerful reason to start a podcast.
I do as well. I think one of the things that I notice, one of my favorite podcasts is Ezra Klein's podcast.
Yeah, I agree.
And
yeah.
As a libertarian, obviously our political beliefs are just radically different.
Right.
And something I notice is the difference in his demeanor when he does press appearances on like TV or radio are his defenses are up because he knows that audience is out there, and so he doesn't let his defenses down when he's having a discussion with like Yuri Levin on his podcast, a prominent conservative thinker.
Right,
they are just two guys, and so it's so great to see two people actually like have a civil discussion that's long form, that's nuanced, and actually results in something where you realize the partisan divides and the hostility and anger aren't nearly as big as they are sort of stoked in the mainstream sensationalist press.
Yeah, and if you're trying to change people's minds through Facebook comments, you're trying to have an argument. And again, it goes back to defenses are up.
Exactly.
Whereas with a podcast, you are really, it's more, they're passively listening to us have a discussion as opposed to trying to make sure the other guy knows that he's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you can walk someone through how you need to mentally unpack something and, understand where the actual divisions are rather than the talking point divisions that they can fundraise on.
Right.
And so that's something I've like when we've discussed topics like feminism. We've had liberals on, many liberals on. We've had a lot of left libertarians who, I would consider fairly liberal, given that as soon as Bernie Sanders ran for president, they immediately jumped behind him.
Like Jen.
Yeah, like Jen.
Huge left libertarian like Jen.
Bernitarians.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is not true.
Not at all.
But Greg loves to tease Jen that she's a left libertarian.
Well, she's a commune living gypsy, but that's fine. Just kidding. No. But yeah, it's something I've really enjoyed because there isn't any other outlet that exists where civil debate takes place.
Right.
Even, firing lines off PBS, that used to be William F. Buckley's show for 29 years on public broadcasting, and you'd have John Kenneth Galbraith, a prominent liberal economist, have a nuanced, thoughtful discussion with a left or a strong free market conservative, and there was no hostility.
Right.
They debated ideas, and they, said how, referenced how these ideas held up against the theory.
Right.
And that is where the discussion took place. It wasn't something where, well, you're just stupid and you just,
like modern day CNN or Fox News TV shows, where as much as I love watching Tucker Carlson, he's there to debate and argue the person, and you're rooting for him to beat the other team, you're not actually really learning much.
Nothing at all, because you already go into it. You're going in to see a slaughter.
Right.
That's what you want to see every night, is Tucker Carlson put someone, in the witness chair, and he's the prosecutor, and he just eviscerates them in front of the jury. And a lot of that is what almost all journalism has turned into in TV.
Yeah.
Radio, given the economics of the industry, where commercial, it's so reliant upon sponsorships and commercials.
Yeah.
The segments are so short, you can't have a thoughtful discussion. Yeah. Really, I don't think.
And libertarians want more. I mean, we put out 3 to 4 hours a week. And the thing we hear from our audience is more. I want more information. I want more. And so if you're trying to reach a libertarian audience and build a community, podcasting is great for that, because you can feed them properly.
Absolutely. And I would say that applies to anything, even if it's not necessarily, even if you don't feel like you are maybe libertarian, but it's not necessarily your passion that you want to turn into a lifestyle business or something. It can be applied to if you're a financial advisor, or if you are trying to become a politico,
right,
and a political advisor. Really, regardless of any area of industry where it's expertise consulting that you can monetize, I would highly recommend you get into podcasting, because since people don't tend to read anymore, long form reading has sort of gone away. It has been the only place where you can still demonstrate your ability to critically think, and then show where you are different than the herd, and then stand out.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get 30, 40,000 words of information and opinion in an hour-long podcast, whereas you're never going to read a 30,000-page white paper or book
if I see 4 sentences all together in a paragraph, I immediately try to go find a smaller snippet. Like, because I read a ton of news, and I run post the articles to our newsroom. And so if it is just a block of text that's anything longer than 4 sentences, I usually know what I'll go back and read it, but I'll go ahead and post it and try to find like the main premise of the article.
Right.
Because, our brains have changed. Our capacity to pay attention for very long is not lending itself well to long-form reading.
But at the same time, the foundation of human communication through the ages has been conversation and storytelling, and that is the quickest way for the brain to learn information. The brain wants to use the path of least resistance. It's trying to preserve calories. It's not trying to work too hard, because if it's consuming too much calories, then it's saying, we're going to die here in the middle of the desert, so we need to conserve energy. Why are you reading this 18-page Libertarians post on Facebook where he's just screeching all over the place? Like,
about the perils of fractional reserve banking.
Right. You have to... You can still have those conversations, but you have to put it in the right format. And social media like Facebook and Twitter are great for promotion. We found it great for fun and for linking things and for short pieces of observation. But it does not do well with long form blocks of post. And it doesn't matter how many times you and I sit there and write out a thoughtful Facebook post, if it's more than 2 paragraphs, our audience, our friends are sitting there going TLDR.
And I bet actually, even if it is something that got a lot of likes and shares, if you were to go back and do a poll of the individuals that liked and shared it, and you didn't, hold them accountable, so it was kind of a blind, feedback poll, the majority wouldn't have read it either.
Right.
They'd have read the first sentence, said, oh, I agree with this sentiment, and gone ahead and liked it.
Yeah.
And even if the end said something horribly offensive, which would be something neat to test.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many articles in my Instapaper that I just don't read.
Right.
It's so, reading is just so 2015, Greg.
That's what every time I post articles in that newsroom, which I'll try to, on my good days, I'll do 15 or so.
Right.
And I try to just find the one, 3-sentence segment that fully, that's all I post, and then I post the link to the article, because I know most people are just going to read that little paragraph.
Right.
And then that's the gist, and then that sometimes that'll, make them, they'll go ahead and decide to read the article.
Yeah, so if they want more information. And that's really where we have found social media to be helpful, is you present a short piece of information and they have a place to go if they want to know more. If they want to listen to the podcast, I find video to be the best way to grab people's attention and bring them to you if you're a brand or a personality. People love Facebook Live, they love video, they love short video, but there are a lot of people out there who do like a longer video. Like we post our hour-long, 2-hour-long podcasts up on YouTube, and they get a lot of views because people watch YouTube like TV. It's also a huge search engine. So it is very effective at drawing people to your brand, but there aren't a lot of, if you take the amount of people that have built their own little community, the amount of YouTube stars, everyone talks about how many YouTubers are making all this money and building community. I would bet you that most of them end up branching out into podcasting and find that to be the better driver of community, because video is a format that, again, I will watch a few seconds of a video. Most people watch the first 15 seconds, but they don't stick through most of the content. I don't watch TV just like I'm always doing something else too.
Right, it's passive just as well.
Right, and you're listening to it. So
the one advantage I would say of YouTube and video, well, one is it's new, so it's like when display ads came out.
Right,
and so it gets you out there in front of people because it's the new thing to click. People were clicking on display ads when they first came out because it was all, it wasn't just hypertext links.
Right,
and so that is the one advantage at the moment for video. The other thing, too, is I think it definitely enhances your brand's image.
Yes.
Because I think it gives it a premium quality and a professional level of refinement that, a podcast doesn't.
Right. And at the end of the day, the goal in everything, and we probably should have defined this earlier, but if you were an organization or a brand or a personality, the goal is to build a community and then give that community value. And it is incredibly important for you to consistently give people what they you are essentially defining what you're going to give people, giving it to them on a consistent basis, and then interacting with them in a way that they feel like they're connected to what you're doing. And that is the key to building a successful community. And if I make a promise on these microphones to our audience, I follow through with it because it's really important to do that, because I need them to trust me, and they trust us because we follow through and we're authentic. I can tell you that Greg and I are the exact same. There are things that are exaggerated for effect, but we generally are just ourselves in conversation. I mean, if you were coming to the party that we're all going to tonight, a party that will be filled with our fellow podcast hosts. We have about 20 people that rotate through the podcast on We Are Libertarians, and it makes up the core of our social networks, our social engagement too, and that's another great benefit of a podcast. But if you were hanging out there, you'd go, oh, these guys are exactly like they are on the show. And so you trust us, that doesn't necessarily mean that you listen to everything that we say, but you value our opinion. And we're authentic. We're not trying to sell you something or get you to do something in a slimy way. We're just trying to have fun talking to each other. And then also, we are selling subscriptions and eventually T-shirts, but that's only to fund more of what we love to do, which is that conversation.
And that's a matter of sustainability.
Right.
Because any venture you're willing to take the risk and then, run it at a loss, hoping that it grows to a stage you can monetize it and
right.
it becomes self-sustaining and hopefully profitable.
Yeah.
But I think like you hit on it exactly, authenticity. What podcasting lets you do is stand out in a way that demonstrates your personality and your authenticity, and that is a huge differentiator. In any industry or whatever your brand you're trying to build, your personality can stand out in a podcast the way it can't on a radio show, even.
Right.
Because you become almost a caricature on a radio show.
Yeah, and I can tell you that as somebody who works in radio, you have 6 minutes at most if you're doing a radio interview. It's not the same as podcasting.
It lends itself to the extreme.
Right.
sort of.
Exactly right.
Is that right? Would you say that's right? Like you see that because you see, I mean, in your day job, you see the celebrity of celebrities,
right?
The most important people come through there. And I would bet you anything, if you were to compare their short segments on the appearances on that show versus if they had a personal podcast and cross-reference the two, you would say, wow, this guy is just so much more mild than I had ever anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, there's one person on the show that I'm thinking of in particular who has a successful podcast where he's much more real and less the character that he plays on the day job. So, yeah, I mean, it allows you to be more authentic and more honest and more open, because if you're distilling everything down to a soundbite, people don't get to know you as well. And I think that in the modern political environment, it's just incredibly important for people to see exactly what you believe, what you truly think, and exactly who you are. Authenticity and trust are so broken in the other two parties that in the Libertarian movement and the Libertarian Party, we have a real opportunity to display those traits, because, I mean, first you have to embody those traits and express those traits. So you have to actually be a truthful person and an authentic person.
Or if you're not a truthful person, you have to commit to it.
Right.
Like you have to be like President Trump.
Right.
You have to just say, you know what? What I love about him is his flip-flopping.
Right. I am a truth teller. So you can display those traits that people are hungry for best through a podcast. And you can, by doing that, you will build a community around you, and that will give you the ability to get people to rally around your cause and drive them to your cause. Today is my birthday, and I donated my cause to a charity that I love called Rupert's Kids, and I set a goal of $500. We are now at $450 raised for Rupert's Kids. And a lot of those people, I don't think, really read what Rupert's Kids is about. They just trust that if I say this is a good charity, they are going to follow through and donate to that charity and the work that they do. And it is an incredibly important position for me as I step up and say, I'm a leader, I'm a thought leader, listen to me, I am to be taken seriously. I know Rupert's Kids, I work with Rupert's Kids, and I'm not going to recommend somebody that I don't know and am not engaged with, because I never want to violate that trust. The relationship that you build with your audience, it's the same kind of principles that you would have in a relationship with other people. If I were to lie to Greg all the time and I were...
Well, you said there were going to be a lot of women that would love us for We're Libertarians, and that hasn't materialized.
Listen, I've done well. I don't know what you're doing over there. So, yeah, Libertarian podcasting, boys, is not necessarily the way to get women.
It's not the new seduction
right.
avenue.
Right. But you cannot lie to your audience. You have to follow through. So those are some of the key principles that I think are really important in creating content. You can just display some of these things in a much better way.
One of the other byproducts, I would say, because it's really about why start one,
right,
is something I've always been someone that I write a lot. Like you see, I end up like writing out my thoughts a lot in our chat groups and other messaging platforms, and that has always helped me clarify what I think.
Right.
Whereas podcasting too has that exact same effect. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm curious about something, a lot of the reason I would start a podcast if I were somebody is intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to know everything from the beginning.
Right.
But it holds you accountable. If you're going to do XYZ topic, you have to invest yourself in it, and it enhances your value of what you can offer, because it gives you that accountability to learn about it, and you start to develop the ability, you really are crystal clear in your ability to articulate what you think.
Yeah, I mean, you and I we do 2 episodes a week, and for every hour of broadcasting that each of us do, I would say we spend at least 2 to 5 hours prepping in terms of listening to other podcasts or reading or watching documentaries or doing something around that topic that is hot in the news, because essentially what we do is we take current events and apply libertarian commentary to it and give you our opinion of what is going on and explain the news to you from a libertarian perspective. And that requires us to do a lot of homework. And so we are able to articulate these things because we feel a sense of duty, because our audience trusts us. we are going to be prepared, and it is an accountability thing, you know, and so we love to do that, and so it forces us, like a pro athlete has to work out because their job depends on it, you know, and they don't want to let their teammates down. Well, that's sort of the same principle that Greg and I have, is that we don't want to let our teammates down, our listeners, our libertarian friends, by putting out an opinion that is wrong or misrepresentative of not only the larger movement or of the facts. You know, are we right? Are we wrong? Are we right 100% of the time? Absolutely not. We're like anybody else. We just say, listen, we're doing our best to try and understand this, and this is what we believe. And
a lot of times it's not even about us necessarily giving them our opinion so much as it is explaining the libertarian opinion,
right,
as well as the opposition to that.
Absolutely.
And so, and I think that's really good too, because that's always, you know, I've tried my best to expose myself to all sides.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah, I'm quite the exposer. No, but I mean, I do my best to read, you know, outlets from varying sources of opinion, and this has allowed me to understand my opposition better than they do.
Right.
I understand the philosophy behind why they believe what they believe. I've learned about the history of their movement, and that, if you're someone in politics, that is incredibly useful, because you end up backing them into corners they have no idea they're up against.
Right. So it is good in terms of accountability and information. It helps you get organized in what you're talking about. So let's talk about organizations specifically. Let me talk about the Libertarian Party of Indiana podcast, which is still out there somewhere. I don't think they did anything after I left, which is a problem. You know, they should have continued the podcast, but it is what it is. I didn't feel at the time when I left the Libertarian Party of Indiana, there was no beef or anything. I just was like, you know, I'm going to focus on We Are Libertarians, and I need to separate myself from the Libertarian Party of Indiana a little bit and give the new leadership a chance to do what they want to do, because I don't know if I would or would not do it a different way, but if they're going to do things that I wouldn't do, I don't want to be a problem.
And you had that same opportunity, so you feel like you should give it to someone else.
Exactly right. So I stopped doing the Libertarian Party of Indiana podcast, but I did it for a couple years, and then before that, for a couple years, a guy named Mike Cole had done it. And what we did is a weekly episode where we interviewed the important people in the Libertarian Party of Indiana. Now, if our party is like your party, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of people who are involved in your local Libertarian Party. And so we had all these great candidates every cycle, and leaders and county party chairs, people that I would have conversations with that were just, they had a story as to why they were a libertarian. They loved the movement. They had great content and great information that they could share with people. And I found that the podcast that we did was a way to essentially weaponize our message. It was a way to take that out of the room and put it beyond just the 100 people that were in our Facebook group, or the, I think, 7,000 people that were on our Facebook at that time. And it grew to a few hundred people that were able to listen in on those conversations. And it gave our candidates a long forum to really outline exactly what they believed. And as libertarian candidates, you don't get a lot of opportunities to have long discussion, nor any media at all.
And really, any political candidate.
Any political candidate. And secondly, as libertarian candidates, a lot of us struggle with the ability to put our own messaging and branding together. So I was able to sit down with a candidate, kind of work through a little outline of what we wanted to talk about. How am I going to make you look good as the host, essentially? You as the candidate, how will you shine and convince people? And then you can take this podcast and you can share it with anybody that will listen and say, hey, I did this podcast. Here's what I believe. If you really care about this, take 20 minutes or take an hour. I think our longest one was an hour. And listen to this podcast and get to know me a little bit better. And we were able to really show off what our candidates believed in a great professional way. And it made them look good, and it gave them things to share with voters. Now, and then we were able to put some updates and some calls to action in the podcast and gather people around, because the problem with a lot of libertarian parties is that because we don't have as much density within the party as like a Republican or Democratic Party does, and our people are spread across the state, there aren't a lot of ties that network people together. So the podcast can be a way to tie people together.
Sort of a social bond.
Yeah, and I want to correct myself, because Jason Sipe does the Indiana Libertarian Update now, and it is basically a video chat with along the same lines with leaders, and then they take that video chat and put it on the Facebook page. So I apologize. Somebody did continue the podcast.
It just took a different format, and there was a little window where it wasn't.
Exactly right. And so I would recommend to everybody, back in the day we had to do it in person, because even though Skype was there, the ability to do podcasts and record them, it just was much harder. But now that we have Skype, every interview that Jen does, most of them are not in person. So you have the ability to really crank these out. Sit down on a Saturday, if you're interested in doing this for your local party, and crank out 5 of them, and do that once a month, and batch them and put them out. And
if that's the way, and that's a great way for you, because really interviewing is a skill, and helping someone who is not normally used to having such, when they get a press appearance, libertarians, it's usually short, and they need to make a really quick, deep impact in a very small amount of time. So they tend to not be, they just don't have much practice in explaining why they believe what they believe, and this will really help the candidate. And it'll help you a lot if you'll learn how to get the best out of them. Yeah, because that's something you do well that a lot of other ones I've listened to, you don't appreciate a Charlie Rose until you see a not Charlie Rose.
Right.
You say, why is Larry King or Charlie Rose considered, so talented? All they do is talk to interesting people.
Omaha,
yeah.
go.
Then you hear someone who's not good. Right. And you're like, ooh.
So in the next episode, we're going to talk about how to get good. But if you're a candidate out there, if you're a candidate. So in 2012, we launched a Rupert for Governor podcast with Rupert Bonham, who was running for governor of Indiana, and he was the former Survivor guy, and it was a really successful campaign here in Indiana. And then we also launched a podcast feed for Andy Horning, who was our Senate candidate, and we launched a podcast feed for Gary Johnson, who was our presidential candidate. And with Gary and Rupert specifically, what I did is, let's take Rupert, okay? So the Rupert for Governor podcast feed may still be out there. I'll have to check before this airs.
He probably wouldn't want it, in case he ever decides to run again. Yeah. Because he was learning his way through it.
Yeah, and Andy Horning, I think, is still out there. I might have killed the feeds just to save the bandwidth, but I'll see if I can't put them back out there in ahead of this being released. So if you want an example of what we did, I know for certain that the Gary Johnson for President podcast feed is still out there, because we continued that in 2016 on We're Libertarians. So Rupert for Governor, what we did is we had these little short 5-minute interviews with Rupert where we talked about a single subject that was just very quick about his beliefs, and we gave his platform, instead of basically on just a 5x7 card, we transferred that to the podcast world. Had technology been what it is now, we would have done video, because it's so easy to do video, and it was not in 2012.
And it really isn't so easy.
Right.
It's just by comparison.
It's night and day. To me, it's easy now, but for most people, I think it's so easy for you to take your smartphone and launch a Facebook Live. That's one thing that Larry Sharp is doing a great job of. He's doing Facebook Q&As on Facebook Live. It's so easy to do that, and it's so engaging for the people that are following you and want to talk. Now, if you do a Facebook Live, if you do any kind of live event, make sure that people are going to make sure that you notify people ahead of time.
There's nothing less appealing than a Facebook Live with no Q&As, because there are no Qs.
Yes.
You're just sitting there giving A's.
It's not a matter of, well, it is a matter of staging. Listen, you want to look professional, and you want to look important, and you want to look like you're happening. So make sure that you have a group of people that are willing to step up and ask you questions ahead of time, because there's going to be a period of 4 to 5 minutes where the Facebook Live is building, and you need to make sure that you have content in that 4 to 5 minutes so you're not sitting there struggling going, and then as other people find the stream, then quote-unquote regular people will start asking questions, and that's when you can engage with them.
I'd recommend starting with canned questions you've gotten in the past that you maybe want to clean up,
right?
And say, XYZ sent me this, and here's how I would respond.
Yeah, so you use video. So we took these little opportunities to record the audio. I would have made those YouTube videos, made them podcasts, and put them on my website, on my Facebook, on my Twitter, and put those out had I been had we run in 2016. We also took the audio of speeches and town halls and the debate audio, because here in Indiana we're fortunate to have the statewide candidates and televised debates, and we put those in the feed. And what I did for Gary Johnson is that when Gary came through, I would record his speeches with audio using the Zoom H2N at the time. Although I have a Zoom H6 now, and I can't recommend it enough. I'll put that in the equipment outline that
podcast privilege.
I'll talk about in the next episode. But I also, here's the thing. I'm not going to recommend that you do this, although you should do this, because I don't know if it's legal or not due to copyright laws. But what I did in 2012 and 2016 is anytime Gary Johnson did an interview and somebody posted it on YouTube, I would go to keepvid.com or some sort of website that downloaded the audio of YouTube videos, and I would pull that audio and put it into my podcast feed, and I created a podcast feed for Gary Johnson. And we had about 2,000 people in 2016 that were following that feed and listening to Gary Johnson's speeches and interviews and anything that was posted for Gary Johnson in 2016 and 2012 as well. And I will tell you that in 2012, I might have posted 20, 25 pieces of audio for Gary Johnson because that was the amount of press that he got, and half of those pieces of audio were speeches that he did in Indiana and that I had access to. And in 2016, it was about 20 every couple weeks. I mean, it was just crazy in terms of the amount of media exposure that he got. And I did that again and put that 3 or 4 hours a week of work and the bandwidth costs into that because I felt that it was important for people to get an unfiltered piece of audio from Gary Johnson. There were so many interviews and things that took place that it was taken out of context, or they didn't hear the interview, but they had an opinion on his what is Aleppo moments. And I wanted people to have the ability to get that information. We still have a feed called Raw Audio Politics where I do that, where I take some of these bigger speeches like the State of the Union and put them into the Raw Audio feed because I want people to have the information, and plus, I want to hear it.
Yeah,
and I listen on podcasts.
Easily indexed and searchable database to go back and hear these things that are the major moments, the major political moments.
Yeah, so those are some ideas for you if you're a candidate or a local party. I think that an audio stream is really important. I think you need to have a YouTube channel. You need to have a SoundCloud. You need to have, or some alternative, because SoundCloud may be dead by the time that you hear this, but you need to have an audio stream to put content out there, and it's very cheap and easy to do as an organization now. When you have your convention, you can plug right out of the microphone board, right into the Zoom, record that audio, take that audio, cut off the ends, load it into a podcast feed, and it takes almost no time in it, and it gives people who couldn't attend the opportunity to access your content. So even,
at any convention or something like that, record all of it as a podcast and then make the guest speakers, little segments.
Yep. You can go to the LPIN YouTube channel and see every convention speaker from 2010 on. And some of those, and every training session that we ever did. And, I put them into playlists to make sure, and then I rip the audio off of those YouTube videos and made something that is now called the Upward Political Training Feed, which is a We Are Libertarians feed, where we give you training tips. And, it's taking that piece of content and putting it in a bunch of different places so people can access you wherever they like to consume information.
It's the path of least resistance. When you're trying to grow something and start something, it makes no sense at all to be adamant that they have to come to you.
Right.
The world has to find a path to your doorstep.
Right.
You try to be, it's like water. It will flow the path of least resistance, and you just make sure you're there to let it flow into.
Yep. All right. So I think that covers it. Hopefully you walk away convinced that a podcast feed is right for you and your organization. I think if you're a personality, if you're a brand, what you should do is watch what Jen Gray is doing. I think Jen does an amazing job of saying, I am a personality within the Liberty Movement. Here are the things that I want to offer the movement. Here are the ways that you can engage with my content. I'm multi-platform, and it's very consistent. Everybody listening knows exactly what Jen wants to achieve. Everybody knows exactly what Jen is good at, because Jen has done a great job of professionally designing and articulating exactly what she is going to do for you. Number one rule, and I'm going to say it at the end of every one of these shows because it is the number one rule. In everything that we do, we have to remember that nothing that comes out of your mouth when you're on any sort of platform for liberty is about you. No one listening cares what I have to say. Nobody cares what Greg has to say. You care about what we have to say because you may get something out of it. And so it is incredibly important that you make sure that you're always articulating what you're going to get, what your listener or viewer or reader will get out of that interaction with you as a content creator or an organization. If I go to your party's website and it doesn't look professional and I can't tell within 3 seconds what you're going to offer me as a voter, I'm not voting for you. I'm not going to investigate further. And libertarians are so incredibly bad at that. Whereas Jen is great at it. Mm-hmm. You know exactly what Jen is about, what she's going to do for you, and how, and you need to mimic that. And that's one of the reasons that Jen's podcast and everything that she does is great, because she's good at passing that instantaneous test.
She understands the importance of presentation and demonstrating value.
Right.
And that's something really important to remember.
She's very Trump-like in that way.
Yeah, no, I mean it is, and it's so important because a lot of libertarians, that isn't normally what they are very much more substantive than they are about image.
I will show you my rightness, and then you will see how right I am, and then you will vote for me. And they never realize that most people never even give them a chance to hear why they're right.
Yeah, because their domain says .wix.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's something as little as that. Like they say, oh, why would people care that it says, xyz.wix.com? Well, it matters because it's unusual, and then they're going to ask why.
Right.
And then they find out that because you didn't spend the money on buying a domain for $9.95.
Right, because you were trying to save $10.
Right. And what's that? Honestly, what's that say about what their donation is going to be used for?
Right. So that is why we believe you should have a podcast. Tons of intangibles when you start a podcast.
Absolutely. And the one last thing I would recommend, if you're going to start one, start it in something that you are already, whatever you spend your free time doing, or whatever, where you could, what's your career and you find it interesting, you don't hate it, do it around that, primarily because then all the prep Chris was talking about that we do, it isn't so much prep as it is what we were already doing.
Right.
It's just a little bit more formalized of a process now. Mm-hmm. And it's what we're already interested in, and that's what makes it so easy to continue going, because continuity is really what differentiates you and what will ultimately let you thrive.
Right. Yeah, I mean, my day job funds We Are Libertarians because
until now,
it's what I love. I would be doing the podcast if I had 10 listeners.
Right.
Because we enjoy doing it.
Exactly. Oh, I would. You don't get the opportunity to have political discussions with people who are smart.
Right.
Most of the time, it's at a backyard barbecue with people who are low information voters, and it's impossible to have the kind of conversation because you're on two totally different levels.
Right. Normies. All right. So thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Liberty. My name is Chris Spangle. This is Greg Lenz. We, of course, are with We Are Libertarians. You can find us at wearelibertarians.com. You can download us on any platform where you consume content. Test us. If we're not on that platform, tell me. I want to be on it. We're on YouTube. We're on iTunes.
Are we on MySpace?
Google Play. You got me. So we're on SoundCloud. We're on all of those places, but you can find us at our hub at we'relibertarians.com. And we'd love for you to come test us out. We may or may not be for you. We're for you, but we may not be for you. So it just depends. So we'd love for you to check us out. And thank you so much to Jen for giving us this opportunity to come on and speak into your beautiful ears. And tune into the next episode where we're going to talk about the best practices for building a successful podcast. So with that, we thank you for listening, and we will see you next episode.
Hey, did you like this episode? Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Learn more about how to market pro-liberty causes and campaigns over at jengray.com, and I'll see you on the inside.